Hello, in this video we're going to be taking a look at solving quadratics by factorising. So this is something that you will have done a lot of in GCSE maths probably, but it's also something that comes up quite a lot in A-level maths. So it's important that you've got a really good understanding of how this method works, and you're also just really confident when it comes to answering these sorts of questions. So hopefully this video is going to help with that. So we're going to start off with a pretty easy example that's going to demonstrate how this method is going to work. Then we'll look at a slightly more difficult example, and we'll finish with an even trickier one. But they're all pretty easy, so it should be fine. So let's start off with this one here, where we have to solve 3x squared plus 6x equals 0. And so by solve, we just mean find the values of x, such that if we substitute them into this equation, it's going to equal 0. Okay? And so for this method to work, so to solve a quadratic through factorisation, it's important that one side of our equation is equal to 0. And you'll see why in a second, okay? So as we're solving this through factorising, let's factorise this left-hand side of the equation. And this is pretty easy to do because both of the terms have a common factor of x. You can see them here and here. So I could sort of factorise that out to the front of a bracket that I'm going to put in. And both of the coefficients of x squared and x both have a highest common factor of 3. So I could factorise that out too. And so if I do that, I'm going to get 3x multiplied by whatever is in my bracket is equal to 0. So how do I know what's going to be inside my bracket? Well, when I expand it, I want there to be two terms, and so there must be two things inside of the bracket. So how do I find out what they are? Well, 3x multiplied by the first term, I want that to give me 3x squared. And so that must just be an x. So the first term inside the bracket is going to be an x. And then we can apply the same logic to find the second one. So 3x multiplied by what takes me to 6x? Well, plus 2. So inside our bracket is x plus 2, okay? So here's why it's important that one side of our equation is equal to 0. Because I've got one thing multiplied by something else equals 0, okay? And the only time that can happen is if one of them is equal to 0, because 0 multiplied by anything is 0, or they're both equal to 0, because 0 multiplied by 0 is also 0. And so because of that, we could say, well, 3x could be equal to 0, or our x plus 2 is equal to 0, okay? Or they're both equal to 0, it doesn't really matter. So if this is the case, then I could divide both sides by 3 and we get that x is equal to 0. Or if x plus 2 is equal to 0, we could subtract 2 from both sides and get that x is equal to negative 2. And they're the two solutions to this quadratic. And we could check that they're correct by, say, substituting one of them back into the original equation and checking it equals 0. So, for example, I'll choose this one here, x equals negative 2, and we substitute it in for x, and if we do, we get 3 lots of negative 2 squared plus 6 lots of negative 2 is equal to 0. So let's now expand this. Well, negative 2 squared is positive 4. 4 lots of 3 is 12. Then we're going to add on 6 lots of negative 2, so we're adding on negative 12, so that's the same as just minus 12, and that equals 0. 12 subtract 12 is 0, and so 0 equals 0. Yeah, that is a correct solution, and you can check for yourself this one here for x equals 0, right? So that's how this method is working. Let's now look at a more sort of classic question where we've got a quadratic in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So we have to solve 4x squared minus 11x minus 3 equals 0. So I'll show you the method that I would use. I think it's pretty good because you can check as you're working through the question that you've done it correctly. But if you've got your own method that you use, stick with that because if it works every time, there's no point learning a new method. So the way I do it is we look at the coefficient of x squared, so 4, and we look at the constant on the end, so in this case negative 3. And we multiply them together, so that's going to give us negative 12. I'll write it over here. We're now going to list all of the factors of negative 12. So for example, we'll have 3 and negative 4, negative 3 and 4, 12 and negative 1, negative 12 and 1, 2 and negative 6, negative 2 and 6, and I think that might be all of them. We're now going to look at the coefficient of x, okay, so in this case it's negative 11. So we're now going to look through our list of factors to find a pair that sum, so a pair that add together to give us negative 11. Now at this point it might seem kind of long, but the more practice you have with this method, the quicker you'll get at doing it. So 3 and negative 4, they add together to give negative 1, so I'll write it in negative 1, so it's not that pair. Negative 3 and 4, well they add together to give positive 1, so it's obviously not that pair either. 12 and negative 1 sum to give 11, so it's not that one. Negative 12 and positive 1, well they sum to give negative 11, so this is the pair that we're going to use. So we're going to use this pair to rewrite the original quadratic, so the 4x squared, that stays exactly the same. Now we're going to use this negative 12 and 1 to rewrite this negative 11x, okay, and the way we're going to do it is by saying, well, negative 12x plus 1x, and the negative 3, so the constant stays the same. So if we take a look at this, you can see this is the same because negative 12x plus x is just the same as negative 11x. So we haven't changed the quadratic at all. So from here, we're going to look at the first two terms, so these two here, and we're going to factorize them. So this is pretty easy. So we could factorize out 4x, and we're going to be left with 4x multiplied by x subtract 3. Then we're going to factorize the last two terms here. Now there's nothing I can factorize out, so what we do in that case is we'll just write plus 1 and then put the rest in the bracket. So plus 1 and then the bracket x subtract 3, okay, because we have to at least do something. And that equals 0, okay. Now this method's good because we can check we've done it right. If these two brackets are the same, it's all going well so far, okay. Now this is going to be one bracket of our factorization, so that's nice and easy, and whatever's left on the outside, that's the other bracket. So our other bracket is going to be 4x plus 1, and so we get x minus 3, 4x plus 1 equals 0, okay, and we factorized it. And I think that method is pretty easy to do. It's a nice sort of steps you can work through to get to the answer. Now the maths that's happening to get from this step here to this one, if you were wondering, is we're just factorizing out this x minus 3 bracket from both of the terms, so we get left with 4x plus 1. Hopefully that makes sense. So once we've done that, we want to solve it, so we've only factorized it this far. Two things multiplied together to give 0, so either x minus 3 is equal to 0, or our 4x plus 1 is equal to 0, okay? And so we can solve these, so adding 3 to both sides gives us x is equal to positive 3, or if in this second example, if we subtract 1 from both sides, we get 4x is equal to negative 1. Dividing both sides by 4, we get x is equal to negative 1/4. And they are the solutions to that quadratic. So I think that was pretty straightforward too. Now let's look at a final example. So here we have to solve 2 lots of x squared minus 3 is equal to x. So the first thing I'm going to do when I see a quadratic like this is I'm going to try and rewrite it in a more familiar form. So in a form like this example up here, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is expand the bracket. So we're going to get 2x squared minus 6 equals x. I'm then going to subtract x from both sides and we get 2x squared minus x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now we just follow the process that we did above. So look at the coefficient of x squared, multiply it by the constant, so that's going to give us negative 12 again. Write down the factors of negative 12, and we're looking for a pair that are going to sum together to give us negative 1, okay? So we could have, say, negative 4 and 3, negative 3 and 4, and because, you know, the more practice of it, you'll be able to spot it more quickly. We can instantly see, well, what's the pair that are going to sum to negative 1? Well, it's this pair because negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1, right? Hopefully that makes sense. So let's use that pair to rewrite the original quadratic. So we've got 2x squared minus 4x plus 3x minus 6 equals 0. Factorize the first two terms, so I could factorize out 2x and we're going to get left with x subtract 2. From the second two terms, we could factorize out positive 3, so plus 3 lots of x subtract 2 equals 0. These two brackets are the same, so we've done it correctly, and that's going to become one of our brackets in the factorization. And whatever's left is the other one, so the other bracket is 2x plus 3, and that equals 0. So two things multiplied together to give 0, either x minus 2 is equal to 0, or our other bracket, so 2x plus 3 is equal to 0. Let's add 2 to both sides and we get x is equal to 2 as this solution. And for the other one, we could subtract 3 from both sides and we get 2x is equal to negative 3. And dividing both sides by 2, we get x is equal to negative 3 over 2 as our other solution. And that's it. So those 3 examples, hopefully they helped. Hopefully you've got a good understanding of how this method works. And go over to my channel if you want to see more A-level maths tutorials. Thanks for watching.